We are winning the war for our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, and this is coming from sources that you would not expect. That's right, in the last couple of days, we've had even more confirmatory analytical information that indeed our position, the right to keep and bear arms as set forth in the Second Amendment, is winning over the hearts and minds of all Americans, and not just the core who watch this channel. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and New York Times bestselling author. If you have not subscribed to the Four Boxes Diner Second Amendment channel, please do so and show your love for the four boxes of American liberty and Frederick Douglass. Okay folks, great news, great news. More and more evidence is coming out, and admissions and concessions are effectively coming out from our adversaries in the gun control / gun rights fight. Specifically, over the last couple of days, we've had major news stories reporting information about how the American public continues to move more and more toward gun freedom, Americans' freedom to right and keep and bear arms, and against the notions of crazy gun control. Specifically, I want to talk about an article from The Hill, which I'll link to down below, that talks about a survey done by Monmouth University about whether or not Americans support an assault weapon ban or a ban on sales of assault weapons. Well, it turns out that the majority of people surveyed support not banning so-called assault weapons. That's right, 49% of the people surveyed by the Monmouth University survey said they do not support a ban on so-called assault weapons or the purchases of them. In contrast, 46% of the respondents said they would support banning so-called assault weapons. But this is a big deal because it shows that the majority in that survey, reported by The Hill, do not support the banning of assault weapons. And that's great. Now, of course, none of this really matters as a matter of constitutional law because popularity is not what protects our rights. It's the right to keep and bear arms as set forth in the text of the Second Amendment, not subject to popularity controls, not subject to democratic whim, which is how our founding fathers wanted it, because as we've talked about on this channel before, democracy is two wolves and a sheep debating about what to have for dinner that night. So we don't want to have our fundamental rights subject to popular will because that's not how the system works. And if you allow it, well, the mob can take away our rights because, as they say, a pure democracy allows 51% of the population to vote to steal the stuff from the other 49%. And we certainly don't want to live in that world. The Founding Fathers did not want us to live in that world. And it turns out we don't live in that world so far, thanks to our Bill of Rights and Second Amendment. Anyway, that's great news out of the Monmouth survey because, again, they point out that the number of people who support assault weapon bans are shrinking. Specifically, they compared this to a June 2022 poll. And Monmouth University indicated that today's results is a mammoth, pardon the pun, 9-point drop. 9-point drop from the 55% of the respondents that they surveyed who supported a ban in June of 2022. So if you think about it, since June of 2022, the percentage of people that are interested in assault weapon has dropped almost 10 points. That is a huge number. And I think that's for a lot of reasons, not least of which is the hard work that you out there do in the Second Amendment community to try to educate people on the realities that so-called assault weapon bans or so-called assault weapons are simply propaganda terms that means basically semi-automatic rifles that are no different than the semi-automatic handguns protected by the U.S. Supreme Court in Heller versus D.C. in 2008, and that these are ordinary firearms that everyone owns. And we, as Americans, should not lose our right to keep and bear arms simply because people misbehave with firearms. In other words, our fundamental rights should not be dictated by what psychopaths do. That's just plain dumb to think that way. And it looks like more and more Americans are thinking this way. And that allows me to segue into a CNN. That's right, folks, a CNN story that actually is conceding the points to some degree as following. They wrote an article, which I'll also link to down below, entitled, "A Nation Rocked by Mass Shootings Goes on an Extended Gun Buying Run." Now, notwithstanding their little skewed title there at CNN, after all, they're admitting that there's an extended gun buying run in America. This goes all the way back to the pandemic because, as I see it from my point of view, the COVID pandemic, right, the defund the police movement, the repeated mass shootings where the cops don't show up in time, and I would say, an ongoing improvement in the education of Americans about the right to keep and bear arms, not least of which the NYSERDA versus Bruen case and people talking about it on YouTube and beyond has all improved the standing of firearms, private firearms for self-defense in America. Why? Because all of these things I've just described teach people that if you are in trouble, well, there's no guarantee the police will be right next to you to protect you. You know the old saying that I carry a gun because a cop is too heavy to carry. Or, of course, when seconds count, police are minutes away. These lessons that we in the Second Amendment community have known about for so long are now penetrating more and more mainstream society. And the best proof of that over the weekend is the CNN article, where they have a very long article talking about how women and minorities and blacks are all buying more and more guns at a greater rate than any other cohort in the United States because they realize the importance of self-defense. So just to put this into context, according to the CNN article, 1 in 5 U.S. households bought a gun from March 2020, that's the start of the pandemic, to March of 2022. This was according to an NORC at the University of Chicago report and survey. Beyond the fact, the huge number that 1 in 5 American households bought firearms, and some of those households have multiple people, of course. If you actually break it down, which the CNN article does, it points out that a Northeastern and a Harvard study found that nearly 3% of U.S. adults, or 7.5 million people, bought firearms for the first time between January 2019 and April 2021. Here's where it's interesting. According to CNN's article, about half of the new gun owners were female, 20% were black, and 20% were Hispanic. Overall, gun owners were 63% male and 73% white. So you can see that the understanding, the human understanding of the value of firearms to protect all innocent life is seeping in even more so than ever before to American gun culture, American culture mainstream-wise, because these lessons of mass shootings and don't teach what the anti-gunners want you to learn. The anti-gunners want to use things like mass shootings to tell you, give up your guns. But the truth is that the American people are not that dumb. They realize that what these mass shooting events teach us is that the government is not capable of protecting us any more than they were capable of protecting us from the COVID pandemic or any of these other things. Not least of which is we see entire massive amounts of people, including the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, arguing that we should defund the police or that we should be bailing out actual violent criminals. This doesn't give a lot additional confidence to the government in terms of protecting us. We are, at the end of the day, as you know, our own first responders. We've said that repeatedly on this channel and in my many books in the past as well. And the last point I want to make about the CNN article is that the numbers are also growing, in my view. I haven't done the math on this, but I'm guessing I'm right. Is that before NYSERDA versus Bruen, a lot of people were interested in getting guns in New Jersey and New York and California, but probably just didn't want to deal with it because it was such a headache and a hassle. But although it's certainly not a perfect system and we have a lot more litigation and fighting to do to protect our Second Amendment rights, don't get me wrong on this point. But the fact is, you have more people in places like New York State and California, New Jersey, actively going out there getting firearms, applying, doing what they need to do to jump through those ridiculous hoops. According to CNN, quote, even in a state like New York, where gun ownership is heavily regulated, business at his 2 gun shops and the range is booming because handgun and shotguns are moving at a brisk pace. Here's a quote from someone in the article. Most people are coming in as new gun owners looking for something for personal defense, or we spend a lot of time with inquisitive people asking about the process, how do you go about it, et cetera, et cetera. So the point being that even in places like New York, you're seeing a huge increase in gun ownership and interest in gun ownership because thanks to NYSERDA versus Bruen, it now appears to be a lot more doable. Again, we don't live in a perfect world in some of those states. We have a lot more fights to do, and we have to continue to keep the bad guys at bay, which I think we're working hard at doing all across the country. Again, we should never give up an inch to the gun controllers, and we want to fight to take back, restore the rights that have been taken from us in those terrible jurisdictions like Washington State and parts of Washington, Seattle, thank you, New York, New Jersey, California and the like. Okay, folks, I hope you learned a little bit something here today, but I think the fact that The Hill is reporting that fewer Americans support assault weapon bans based on surveys of Monmouth University, and CNN is reporting similar results in terms of the interest in acquiring privately owned firearms by more and more Americans of all cohorts. I think, again, the future is bright for our Second Amendment rights, but we have to keep on working, keep on fighting. We never want to surrender, and we never want to back down, and we never want to forget the fact that freedom, in the end of the day, is not free. Okay, folks, if you haven't subscribed to the Four Boxes Diner, please do so, and we'll see you again soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.